Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Cohere and members of the committee. I'd like to thank you for inviting me here today, and I hope that I can be of help to you all in your task of interpreting the findings of the Citizens' Assembly. I've been asked specifically to give my opinion as an expert in the field of mental health. My present appointment is a joint academic clinical one. I'm a consultant psychiatrist in Tallaght in the HSE services, and I'm also a professor of clinical psychiatry in Trinity, where I lead a research programme in perinatal psychiatry. In my past, I've led a national perinatal psychiatry service in London for 5 years in the Maudsley Hospital, covering all of the UK, and I had a concurrent head of section of perinatal psychiatry in King's College Medical School, where I also led a research programme in perinatal depression. I've published in the scientific literature in perinatal depression, and I've written a book about this topic. I've co-authored the standard clinical tools for perinatal psychiatry disorder in the UK and was an expert on the National Institute for Clinical Guidelines for the management of perinatal depression. I've set up 2 hospital psychiatry services, including the suicide prevention service in Beaumont Hospital. I've been an expert witness at the 2 Oireachtas hearings leading to the Protection of Life During Pregnancy Act, and I was also privileged to be an expert witness in the Citizens' Assembly. And more recently, I have co-hosted with the National Women's Council of Ireland the World Congress on Women's Mental Health in March of this year in the RDS in Dublin. I would like to start by thanking, first of all, the members of the Citizens' Assembly. The process and the governance of the CA in relation to the 8th Amendment was an example, I think, of the best of democratic principles in action. Their conclusions were solution-focused and they were not ideologically driven. Most of the recommendations are relevant to mental health, but have been spelled out in a very helpful way that leaves no room for ambiguity. And I think this clarity is one of the strengths of the document. A majority of the citizens recommended 12 reasons for which termination of pregnancy should be lawful in Ireland. For each general health reason listed, there was a parallel mental health reason. For example, 99% voted that abortion should be lawful where there was a real and substantial risk to the physical health of the woman, and 95% where there was a real and substantial risk to the life of the woman by suicide. Sorry, I meant life in the first para. 93 and 90% of the citizens respectively supported abortion where there was a serious risk to physical health and a serious risk to mental health. And the same applied for the not serious risk to physical health, which was 79%, and the risk to mental health of the woman, which was 78%. And I think there are 2 points I would like to address in relation to these recommendations. The first point is that the support for the provision of abortion care for medical and mental health were very similar. In this regard, 72% of the members recommended that a distinction should not be drawn between physical and mental health of women. And I can say it is an enormous relief that the Citizens' Assembly concluded that there should be no distinction between medical and psychiatric risk. The mind-body dualism division has plagued our society and created much unnecessary suffering, leading to stigmatisation and discrimination in those who suffer with psychiatric disorders. Separation of mental from physical health has been at the heart of the debate about abortion for the last 3 decades, following from the 1992 ruling that suicide risk constituted grounds for abortion following the X case. We've had 2 referenda in 1992 and 2002 where suicide was upheld by a majority of the citizens as a legitimate reason for abortion. We had a very difficult debate in 2012-2013 leading up to the Protection of Life During Pregnancy Act in relation to suicide. It is now recognised in law that suicide constitutes a risk to the life of the woman in the circumstances of an unwanted pregnancy. The Citizens' Assembly understood that there should be no distinction and made this understanding explicit. between mental and physical health. The importance of this recommendation, in my opinion, cannot be underestimated, and it changes everything. I just want to say a few words about dualism because it has been a very destructive force in society's understanding of health. It may seem evident, but the brain controls the body, so that while one may feel sad in one's heart or anxious in one's gut, this is being directed from the brain. And the dialogue between the body and the brain is never stronger than during pregnancy. And this is because the pregnant uterus produces hormones, and these hormones cross into the pregnant woman's brain and modify the emotional brain. Emotional changes also occur, obviously, because pregnancy is very challenging, and parenthood is probably the most serious challenge that any of us will face in our lifetimes. My research group has looked at rates of depression during pregnancy in Irish maternity hospitals. This was the first such study, and we found rates of 16%, which are slightly higher than the EU norms. And being depressed and pregnant is a very, very serious problem. Not only is the woman intensely distressed, but the stress hormones alter the baby's physiology, so that the baby is growing, the fetus is growing in a high-stress milieu and is in a greater increased risk of being born earlier and with obstetric problems. Depressed pregnant women are often unable to attend to their own needs, and they don't attend as regularly for outpatient appointments as non-pregnant women. Infants born to women who are depressed during pregnancy are more likely to suffer from childhood learning and behavioural problems and from depression in early adulthood. All of this demonstrates that the emotional brain is important not just to the general well-being of the pregnant woman, but to the subsequent health of her baby and the baby's trajectory throughout life. The treatment of psychiatric disorders in pregnancy is seen as a priority for this reason among colleagues. So an unplanned or an unwanted pregnancy increases the risk of depression during pregnancy. A US study in over 100,000 women published earlier in this year examined the relationship between unwanted pregnancy and perinatal depression. They found that having depression, an unwanted pregnancy increased the rates of perinatal depression by 50%. It has to be said, though, that in this study, as in all other published studies from OECD countries, the option of legal abortion was available for these women.
Professor, I'm going to have to interrupt you because there's a phone interfering with your mic. So do you have a phone on your person or in your handbag near you or anything?
I have, but it's switched off.
It's definitely completely off.
In airplane mode?
Yeah, even airplane mode should be fine, yeah.
Yeah.
Just to check, no, because
well, I just put it somewhere else?
Yeah, that should be, that should, they can let us know, but it's just that it's difficult for the transcript to be done and for coverage, yeah. So,
is that any better?
Is there a tablet, an iPad, or a computer or anything?
No.
And Deputy McGrath, yours is off as well, is it? Okay. So we'll have to continue, yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So who can't hear me then?
No, the transcript, the people who do the transcript and the coverage for the television as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was talking about unplanned pregnancies in the study that was done in the US in over 100,000 women, and perinatal depressions increased by 50%. And yes, my last point was that
Sorry to interrupt you. I feel.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
So the option of legal abortion was available. And this point was made again in a very impressive meta-analysis published by the Academy of Royal Colleges in London, that the academic literature only reflects findings where abortion services are available, and there are no scientific studies from OECD countries on mental health outcomes where women could be forced to go through with an unwanted pregnancy. So we are talking about high risks of depression in countries where women have the option of legal abortion. And the difference between Ireland and other OECD countries is a woman's only option to obtain an abortion here is to travel. Access to this service is facilitated by state-funded information services, but a service based in another jurisdiction has clearly inherent problems in it, and these problems will affect the mental health of the woman. There will always be women who will not be able to travel to have an abortion. The situation of the migrant women who are unable to travel has been very painfully laid out by the case of Miss Y. I've seen women in my own practice who are unable to travel because of hostility by abusive partners, or threats from their community where abortion is unacceptable culturally. The category of women who are too sick to travel also includes women who have debilitating mental illness. I have patients who are too sick to travel to the outpatient clinic without being accompanied by a community psychiatric nurse. Many of these have never travelled outside of Dublin. It would be way beyond their capacity or their personal resources to travel to the UK. Neither would they have the capacity to source the abortion pills, nor would any of the mental health workers be able to facilitate them in doing this, because it is obviously a crime. And women with handicaps such as this need to be compassionately cared for in settings appropriate to their high needs. The second problem about having a de facto UK-based service is one that every Irish woman or girl who travels with bears. The UK path to abortion is a sad and shameful one that Irish women have endured for 5 decades now, and it is damaging to women's mental health. It is filled with shame and humiliation. The girl or woman is easily identified and sees herself as being easily identified. What should be a private and sensitively conducted procedure becomes a public journey. At the heart of the problem of abortion in Ireland is one issue, and the issue is that of unwanted pregnancies. It is self-evident that there will always be unwanted pregnancies, there always have been, and there will always be a requirement for abortion. The mental health arguments for decent abortion services apply not just to the women who need abortion care. I would go further than this and say that the mental health of everybody in Ireland is being damaged by the 8th Amendment, because we are all shamed by the current situation. To conclude, the recommendations of the Citizens' Assembly are a welcome departure from the dualism of physical versus mental health, in their recognition that mental well-being is inseparable from physical well-being. This is particularly relevant in pregnancy, where there are high levels of emotional vulnerability that are inseparable from the physiology of the pregnancy. The recommendation that all facets of mental well-being, from suicide risk to damage to mental health, be considered as grounds for abortion takes into account the complexity of each woman's psychological experience of an unwanted pregnancy and the unpredictability of risk. The rigidity of constitutional absolutes is the polar opposite of what we need to deal with the needs of pregnant women who have unwanted pregnancies. A solution-based, compassionate response to this problem, I think, will require the removal of the prohibition on abortion from the Constitution. I agree with the Citizens' Assembly's recommendations that a legal framework that will allow for the unpredictability of obstetric and psychiatric risk should be put in place. Mental health service needs to be embedded within future abortion care because of the complexity of the emotional issues that are frequently experienced in unwanted pregnancies. I think that the constitutional ban and the consequent rigid legal restrictions in Ireland can actually escalate psychiatric risk. The constitutional vice grip and the legal complexities that have followed upon this make the mental health care of women with unwanted pregnancies unpredictable, and it is actually an obstacle to care. Thank you.